ID'd 5814, variant standard titled The Hidden Debt Cinematic YouTube Voiceover Script. They say life can change in an instant. For me, it happened on a chilly October morning when a simple delivery turned into a revelation that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and the man my grandfather really was. My name is Bryson Thompson, and 6 months ago, I thought I had life figured out. Or at least, I thought I did. Regional manager at a lumber supply company, steady paycheck, a house in the suburbs, a wife I thought loved me, and a daughter who was my entire world. But life has a way of humbling you. It doesn't knock politely. It takes. When Melody, my wife of 12 years, told me she'd fallen in love with her CrossFit instructor, I laughed. I actually laughed. I thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. 3 days later, the divorce papers were on the kitchen counter next to the half-empty bottle of bourbon I'd been nursing like it held the answers. By Friday, I was packing boxes, and by the next month, I was delivering them for $12 an hour. The irony wasn't lost on me. From managing shipments worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to scanning packages worth less than my lunch, the system decided I was the one to blame, the one who had to pay. The house went to her because Juniper needed stability. The savings? Gone. The car? Shared custody like my daughter. The lawyers carved up my life so cleanly it barely bled. But this isn't about a divorce. This is about the morning I met a man named Aldrich Patton and how one small brown package opened the door to a secret buried for 70 years. It was October 15th, the kind of crisp morning where your breath fogs the glass before sunrise. My alarm went off at 5:30 in the tiny apartment above my uncle's garage, a place that smelled of oil and rain. The tiles in the bathroom were cracked, the water pressure barely more than a drizzle, and the instant coffee I made tasted like burnt cardboard. But it was mine, for now. My Uncle Royce had taken me in after the divorce. Just until you get back on your feet, he'd said. We both knew those feet were sinking fast. He ran an auto repair shop, lived with his wife and two boys in the main house, and offered me the small loft above the garage. I paid rent when I could, which wasn't often. I'd spoken to Juniper the night before, my 9-year-old, the only person who could make this hollow life feel like something more. She'd asked if I was coming to her school play that weekend. I wanted to say yes. I needed to. But the schedule said otherwise. Daddy has to work, I'd told her, and the silence that followed nearly broke me. That morning, I loaded the van, 43 stops, mostly in the Northbrook Hills neighborhood. The kind of place where the lawns are perfect, the mailboxes are polished, and the people pretend their lives don't creak beneath the surface. The GPS guided me through streets named after English counties: Devonshire, Canterbury, Willow Rest, names that reeked of privilege and history. Every mile deeper into that neighborhood was a reminder of what I'd lost and what I probably would never have again. Delivery after delivery blurred together. Doorbells, signatures, forced smiles. Then came the Patton estate, a wrought iron gate that could have guarded a palace, stone lions flanking the entrance, the kind of symmetry you only see in places where nothing is left to chance. The package I carried was small, maybe a book, maybe documents, addressed to Aldrich Patton. I pressed the intercom, announced the delivery, and the gates swung open like I was being invited into another world. The driveway curved through manicured gardens, every hedge trimmed with military precision. The house itself, a modern architectural masterpiece, all clean glass and silent power. I remember standing at the door, my reflection warped in the pristine glass, and thinking how far I'd fallen. A few years ago, I might have been invited here for a business deal. Now, I was just the guy dropping off the package. When the door opened, an elderly man stood before me, late 80s, maybe older. Cashmere cardigan, silver hair combed back, eyes sharp despite the years. He looked at me and froze. For a moment, he didn't breathe. His hand trembled on the doorframe. Then his face, lined and dignified, broke. His lips quivered and tears filled his eyes. "You're a Thompson, aren't you?" he whispered. I blinked. Yes, sir, Bryson Thompson." And then the old man did something I'll never forget. He started to cry, not the soft, polite tears of nostalgia, but the deep, shaking sobs of someone who's carried a ghost for too long. He stared at me like I was the past made flesh. "You look just like him," he said. "Just like Cecil." That name, Cecil Thompson hit me like a jolt. My grandfather, the man who'd raised me after my parents died. The man whose silence about the Korean War had always hung like smoke over our family. Aldrich Piton took a step back and motioned me inside. I hesitated. Company policy said no entering customer homes, but something in his eyes told me this wasn't just about a delivery. Inside, the mansion was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that money buys to drown out loneliness. Portraits lined the walls, soldiers, landscapes, a younger Aldrich in uniform. He motioned for me to sit, his voice shaking as he said, "I've been looking for your family for 70 years. I didn't know what to say. 70 years? He nodded slowly. Your grandfather saved my life. That sentence landed like a thunderclap. He began to tell me a story that sounded like it belonged in a movie, a story from the Korean War in the dead of winter, on a hill called White Ridge. My grandfather, Private Cecil Thompson, had carried a 19-year-old soldier, a boy named Aldrich Patton, 2 miles through enemy fire. 3 bullets hit him, but he never stopped, never once considered leaving the boy behind. Aldrich survived. Barely. My grandfather didn't take credit, didn't file a report, didn't even tell the story. He'd refused medals, money, or recognition. I was just doing my job, he'd said back then. But to Aldrich, it was everything. He'd spent the rest of his life trying to find Cecil. I hired private investigators, traced military records, even scoured genealogy databases when the internet came along, Aldrich said, his voice trembling with both age and emotion. But by the time I found the Thompson line again, he was gone. 16 years gone. My grandfather had died when I was 22, 6 weeks after his cancer diagnosis. The only legacy he'd left me was an old shoebox filled with faded medals and a handful of war stories he'd only tell after too much bourbon. Aldrich stood up and went to a small desk in the corner. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thin leather folder, the kind that looks like it's carried too much weight for too many years. This, he said, handing it to me, was meant for him, but I think he'd want you to have it. Inside was a document, old but pristine, with the letterhead of the U.S. Department of Defense, a notarized statement confirming my grandfather's heroic actions on that frozen hill, and a bank draft. I looked down and felt my throat tighten. The number had 7 zeros. I almost dropped it. This can't be real, I said. Aldrich smiled faintly. It's very real. That money was meant for him, a share of a war contract payment that never made it to him because he refused it. I've kept it in trust ever since, adjusted for inflation, interest, and time. It's yours now. For a second, I couldn't speak. The weight of it, not just the money, but the meaning, hit me like a freight train. All those years of my family scraping by, of my grandfather working himself to the bone at the rail yards, never missing a shift, never complaining, never saying a word about what he'd done. He could have been wealthy. We could have been secure. But he'd chosen pride over payment. And now, decades later, the past had come knocking, literally, at my door. Aldrich wiped his eyes. I owed your grandfather my life. Every success I ever had came because he refused to let me die. I thought I'd never find a way to repay him. But seeing you here today, he paused. Maybe fate decided it wasn't too late after all. I sat there, staring at the papers, my heart hammering in my chest. The uniform I wore, sweat-stained and cheap, suddenly felt heavier. My hands were shaking. Somewhere between disbelief and awe, I realized that this wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, about a man who'd given everything and asked for nothing. That night when I got home, I couldn't sleep. The city outside was quiet, the hum of traffic like a heartbeat in the distance. I opened my grandfather's old shoebox, the one with his medals. For the first time, I looked at them not as relics, but as proof. Proof that even the humblest life can carry unimaginable weight. The next morning, I went back to the Baton estate, not for delivery, but for answers. And what I found waiting there wasn't just gratitude. It was unfinished business. Because Aldrich Piton had one more thing to show me, something that would change the story all over again. A hidden letter, a sealed envelope with my grandfather's handwriting on it, and inside, a confession. One that explained why he'd turned down the money, why he'd hidden the truth, and why some debts can never truly be repaid. To this day, I can still hear Aldrich's voice trembling as he handed it to me. Your grandfather's secret, he said, didn't just save my life, it changed it. And when you read this, you'll understand why your family was never meant to be rich. I unfolded the letter, the paper yellowed and fragile in my hands, and as my eyes scanned the words, I realized everything I thought I knew about my grandfather, about my family, was about to be rewritten. But that is a story for another day. You ever have one of those mornings where everything you thought you knew about your life suddenly changes? Where a single knock on a door can rip open the past, exposing secrets that were buried for decades, secrets that could rewrite your family's entire story. That morning, October 15th, I was Bryson Thompson, 38 years old, divorced, barely scraping by as a delivery driver, and completely unaware that my grandfather's past was about to crash into my present like a freight train. I used to avoid the rich neighborhoods, the kind of places where manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges scream everything you've lost, where your ex wife's friends and former lovers live in oversized houses that make your apartment feel like a closet. Northbrook Hills was one of those neighborhoods, and that morning it was my turn to go in. My route? 1847 Willow Rest Drive, the Piton Estate. At the time, it meant nothing to me. Just another delivery, another house, another reminder that some people lived lives you couldn't even imagine while I was counting pennies to pay rent. I grabbed the package, small, light, unremarkable, and trudged through the heat of an October sun that felt more like summer than fall. My uniform stuck to my back, my hands dirty from hours of loading boxes. I wiped them on my pants, feeling every bit as out of place as I knew I looked. By the time I reached the gates of the Piton Mansion, I felt like I'd crossed into another world, one that wasn't meant for someone like me. The iron gates swung open automatically as I pressed the intercom, the driveway stretching longer than my entire apartment building. Marble steps led to a mahogany door with brass fixtures shining like gold. I rang the bell. The chime echoed. Melodic, refined, probably worth more than my monthly rent. I tried to steady my breathing as I waited, looking around at the fountain, the hedges, the six-car garage. The kind of wealth that makes your chest tighten if you think about it too long, so I didn't. When the door opened, I expected a maid or a butler. Instead, an elderly man stood there, dressed in a crisp white shirt under an expensive cardigan, blue eyes piercing mine like he could see through time. And then it happened. His whole body went rigid, his color drained, his voice barely a whisper. "Dear God, you're a Thompson, aren't you?" "Yes, sir," I said, my voice shaking. "Bryson Thompson." His hands started trembling violently, a full-body shake, not the gentle kind of age. Tears ran down his cheeks. "You look exactly like him, exactly like Seal." I froze. My grandfather? Seal? Thompson? A man who had died 16 years ago? The one who'd raised me after my parents' fatal accident? The stranger's voice broke as he continued. "Your grandfather saved my life in Korea. December 3rd, 1952. Hill Tucson 66 near the Choson Reservoir." The package slipped from my hands, thudding softly on the marble. Nobody in our family ever spoke about my grandfather's service. Bronze Star. That was all I knew. The metal sat locked away in a bank because I couldn't even afford the storage unit for his things anymore. No confusion. You have his eyes, his jaw, even the way you stand. Military bearing without military service. Am I right? I nodded, stunned. Grandfather had taught me to stand that way, shoulders back, left foot slightly forward, to look confident even when I wasn't. But how could this stranger see that in 30 seconds? "Please," he begged, "come inside. I've been searching for your family for 70 years. I hesitated. The clock was ticking. My delivery company tracked everything by GPS. Any deviation could get me written up, even fired. "Mr. Piton, I'm on the clock," I started. "I'll call your supervisor," he said. "I own shares in your delivery company. I've been looking for you my entire life." I followed him inside. Against every rule, I stepped into a mansion that reeked of quiet power. Persian rugs on polished hardwood, oil paintings with gold frames, a chandelier that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years, yet the man moved as if none of it mattered. He led me urgently to a wood-paneled study, the kind of room where decisions shaping industries are made. Then he did something I'll never forget. He went to a painting of a fox hunt and swung it open, revealing a hidden safe. Fingers trembling, he spun the dial, missed numbers, muttered 70 years under his breath, and then finally, with a soft click, he opened it. From the safe, he withdrew a yellowed envelope, sealed with wax darkened by time. I wrote this letter in 1953, he said, turning to me. Your grandfather refused to take it. He didn't save me for money, but I made him a promise that day on that frozen hill, and Petertons keep their promises. Aldrich Piton, now 89, settled into a leather wingback chair. I was 19, a private first class, spoiled, rich, naive. The war was supposed to be an adventure, but it wasn't. Chinese forces surrounded us on Hill 266, temperatures 20 below zero. Men losing fingers and toes to frostbite faster than bullets could claim them. Our lieutenant got hit in the first wave, and everyone else ran. But Seal, your grandfather, he didn't. He carried me over his shoulder 2 miles through enemy fire, bullets whizzing past us, blood soaking through uniforms, and never stopped talking, never once thought of leaving me behind. I could hardly breathe. Grandfather had never mentioned being wounded. No Purple Heart in the box. No scars I'd ever seen. And yet, here I was, staring at a man whose life had been saved by the man I called grandfather. When we got to the medical station, delirious from blood loss, I asked him, "My family owns Piton Pharmaceuticals. Anything you want will reward you." And he smiled and said, "Kid, just stay alive. That's reward enough." Aldrich leaned back, his eyes glistening. After the war, my father built a fortune in medical supplies, bandages, morphine, everything. He wanted to reward Seal, but your grandfather vanished. No forwarding address, nothing. We couldn't find him. He handed me the envelope, and I could feel its weight, both physical and symbolic. I kept looking because I got to live. College, marriage, children, 3 grandchildren, 70 years of life that I wouldn't have had if your grandfather left me on that hill. I broke the seal. Red wax crumbled to the Persian rug. Inside, a document, official, typed, faded, but legible. From Piton Pharmaceuticals and First National Bank of Boston. Instructions. A trust fund, money set aside, gathering interest, waiting for a Thompson to claim it. No one had, until now. "Read it out loud," Aldrich whispered. My hands trembled, but I began. The words weren't just numbers on paper, they were a legacy. Proof of courage, sacrifice, and the humility of a man who refused rewards. Proof of why my family had struggled, why my grandfather's sacrifices went unnoticed, and why, finally, the past was catching up to me. As I read, I realize the story didn't end here. Aldrich had one more secret, one final piece of the puzzle, waiting in the shadows of that estate. A letter with my grandfather's own handwriting, written decades ago, holding the key to why he had turned down the reward, why he disappeared, and why some debts can never truly be repaid. And as I folded the document, the edges trembling under my fingers, I understood. The past wasn't just history. It was a debt, a promise, and a secret, waiting for the right Thompson to uncover it. That morning, I delivered more than a package. I delivered a legacy. But what was in that final letter? And why had my grandfather refused the life he could have had? The answers were waiting, just beyond the edge of history. And I was about to find out. Imagine discovering that everything your family ever struggled for could have been different. That the hardships, the sleepless nights, worrying about bills, the constant grind just to survive, weren't because you were unlucky. Not entirely. But because someone in your past carried a secret, a burden, and a legacy so immense it could rewrite generations. That was my reality on a chilly October morning, standing in front of the Piton Estate, 1847 Willow Rest Drive. Package in hand, uniform sticking to my back, heart racing. My name is Bryson Thompson, 38, divorced, working as a delivery driver for $12 an hour. 6 months ago, I was a regional manager at a lumber supply company, living the life I thought I had figured out. A beautiful wife, a smart daughter, a house in the suburbs, until life had other plans. My wife left. The house went. My savings vanished. My confidence evaporated. Suddenly, I was scraping by, delivering packages through neighborhoods that seemed to mock my fall from grace. Northbrook Hills was one of those neighborhoods. Mansions lined the streets like monuments to other people's success. Law partners, surgeons, people who had it all. Places where the lawns were perfectly manicured and the garages could fit more cars than I'd ever driven in my life. And that morning, I had no choice. My route demanded it. The GPS didn't care about my pride. It didn't care about my heartbreak. It just calculated efficiency. 1847 Willow Rest Drive, the Piton Estate. I trudged up the marble steps, the package in my hand, feeling the dirt from my morning deliveries cling to my skin. The door loomed before me. Solid mahogany, brass fixtures gleaming like gold. I rang the bell. The chime sounded melodic, elegant, expensive. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I expected a maid, a butler, someone who could pretend to care. What I got instead was history itself staring at me through an elderly man's blue eyes. Dear God, you're a Thompson, aren't you? Yes, sir, I whispered. Bryson Thompson. The man's hands shook violently. Tears streamed down his cheeks. You look exactly like him. Exactly like Seal. My grandfather. Seal Thompson. A man who had raised me, who had died 16 years ago. And now, standing in front of me, this man, Aldrich Peton, 89 years old, was trembling, overwhelmed, because he recognized something in my face he hadn't seen in decades. Your grandfather saved my life in Korea, he said. December 3rd, 1952. Hill Tucson 66, near the Chosun Reservoir. The package slipped from my hand. My mind couldn't process it. Nobody in our family ever spoke of my grandfather's service. Bronze Star. That was it. The rest was silence. No confusion. You have his eyes, his jaw, even the way you stand. Military bearing without military service. Am I right? I nodded. Stunned. My grandfather had trained me to stand that way, shoulders back, slight favoring of the left foot, a posture that projected confidence even when there was none. But how could this stranger see that? Please, come inside, he urged. I've been searching for your family for 70 years. I hesitated. My GPS was ticking, my delivery schedule was unforgiving, but something in his voice, something in the tears that streaked his cheeks, made me take a step forward. Inside, the mansion unfolded before me like a storybook. Persian rugs over polished hardwood, oil paintings in gilded frames, chandeliers that could buy my apartment building 10 times over. Yet Aldrich moved with purpose, urgency, not caring for wealth, leading me to a wood-paneled study that smelled of leather and old books. This was the kind of room where history had been made. He went to a painting of a fox hunt and swung it open, revealing a hidden safe. Fingers trembling, muttering 70 years, he spun the combination, finally opening the door to reveal a yellowed envelope, sealed with wax that had darkened with age. I wrote this letter in 1953, he said. Your grandfather refused to take it. He didn't save me for money, but I made him a promise that day on a frozen hill, and Petertons keep their promises. He gestured for me to sit. His voice softened. I was 19, a private first class. Rich, naive, expecting war to be an adventure. It wasn't. Chinese forces surrounded us on Hill 266. Temperatures 20 below zero. Men losing fingers and toes to frostbite faster than bullets could claim them. Our lieutenant was hit in the first wave. Everyone ran, except Seal. He carried me 2 miles through enemy fire, bullets tearing through his own body, blood soaking through our uniforms, and never stopped talking, never once considered leaving me behind. I could barely breathe. My grandfather had never mentioned being wounded, never mentioned the Bronze Star, and now I understood why. He was too proud. When we reached the medical station, delirious from blood loss, I offered him anything. Money, reward, recognition. He smiled and said, Kid, just stay alive. That's reward enough. Aldrich's eyes glistened. After the war, my father built a fortune in medical supplies, bandages, morphine, everything. We wanted to reward Seal, but he vanished. No forwarding address, nothing. We couldn't find him. We searched for decades. Military records, investigators, databases, nothing until now. He handed me the envelope. My hands trembled as I broke the 70-year-old wax seal. Inside, documents from Peton Pharmaceuticals and First National Bank of Boston, a trust, a life insurance policy, everything set aside for a Thompson to claim. Read it out loud, Aldrich whispered. My voice shook as I read. The trust had been established January 15th, 1953, $10,000 initial deposit, compounding at 8% annually. 70 years of accumulation. I pulled out my phone and did the math. $2.1 million. Aldrich corrected me. $2,140,000 and change. And then there was more. A life insurance policy, $800,000. Total, about $3 million. I sank into the leather chair, my delivery uniform suffocating me. $3 million, $30,000 a year delivering packages. This was freedom, education for my daughter, a house of my own, a chance to breathe without fear. Why keep searching all these years, I asked. Aldrich smiled for the first time. He pulled out a worn family photograph, a smiling wife, children, grandchildren. Every birthday, every wedding, every moment of life you see here, I owe to Cecil Thompson. The money is nothing compared to what he gave me. He never wanted recognition. That was Seal. Heroes don't talk about it, they just carry it quietly and move on. 3 hours later, I sat in my delivery van outside the Piton mansion, holding verified bank documents. Nearly $3 million, legitimate, verified, ready to transfer. Aldrich gripped my shoulder. Your grandfather gave me 70 more years of life. I built a pharmaceutical empire, had 3 children, 7 grandchildren. None of this would exist without Cecil Thompson. This isn't a gift, Bryson. It's a debt finally paid. I called my Uncle Royce. At first, he thought I was joking. Then he thought I'd been scammed. Finally, seeing the documents, he cried. Bryson, we grew up with nothing. Mom worked 3 jobs. We ate beans and rice 4 nights a week. Seal never wanted money. He taught us something far greater. Do the right thing because it's right, not for reward. 2 weeks later, I stood in my new office at Thompson Lumber Supply, a business started with part of the trust. College funds for Juniper, my brother Royce's kids, and 5 new employees, all veterans in need of work. On my desk, grandfather's bronze star, finally framed. Melody called, suddenly wanting to talk about reconciliation. I told her the only discussion was Juniper's college fund, fully funded. The silence on her end felt like victory. 6 months later, Aldrich Piton passed peacefully. His final message to me: tell Bryson I finally kept my promise to Cecil. The debt is paid. At his funeral, hundreds honored a man who had spent 70 years repaying a life debt. But I knew the truth. The debt was never his to pay. My grandfather had given freely, without expectation, without recognition. I carry that story now. Some gifts can't be measured in money, but sometimes money is the only way left to say thank you. And every time I pass the Piton mansion, I remember the day a delivery changed everything. Not because of the money, but because it revealed who my grandfather was and who I could become. Thompsons don't quit. We might deliver packages, but we carry more than boxes. We carry legacy. Some stories aren't just history, they're responsibility, they're honor, and they're waiting for the right person to see them. What would you do if a secret this massive, this life-changing, landed at your doorstep? And how far would you go to honor the sacrifices of those who came before? The past isn't gone. Sometimes it's just waiting to be claimed.